Welcome back, guys, to Battleground Stories. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. Thank you. February 1947, Ross. Sea, the southernmost point of the world, a place that swallows steel and men alike. We were on our 5th day. In the final stage of the expedition, the sky was clear, but something was wrong. It was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. The ice beneath us didn't look cracked. It appeared carved, with long lines that didn't match any map. For some unexplainable reason, my instruments were trembling, but the real fear hadn't begun yet. I am Robert Mitchell, a second-class radio operator. 24 years old, I served in the Pacific during the war. But nothing had prepared me for what we found in the ice. The engines idled low, and the radio hissed with a pulse that didn't belong to any station. Every 9 seconds, it tapped once, then stopped. I'd been monitoring frequencies for 3 days, and that pulse had been there the whole time. Our orders were simple on paper: photo runs, weather samples, practice landings. But no one spoke of what we really carried in the hold. The crate was sealed under Navy tape, stenciled only with numbers. It made a faint knocking sound when the wind came up. The pilot, James Sullivan, was a veteran with steady hands. The engineer, Marcus Stone, barely 22, still had that eager look. And Lieutenant Edward Hayes, our mission commander, spent more time staring at sealed documents than at the ice below. We sailed south from Norfolk in late summer of 1946. The world had just stopped burning from the last war. They called it Operation Highjump, a name that sounded harmless enough. But 13 ships, thousands of men, and a carrier filled with aircraft told a different story. You don't bring that much firepower to study ice. I was assigned to a PBM Mariner flying boat. We belonged to the central group under Rear Admiral Richard Byrd's command. The carrier USS Philippine Sea hauled most of the planes south. Our tender, the Pine Island, carried the crews and gear for the seaplanes. She was built for rescue and reconnaissance, long range, designed to operate in the harshest conditions on Earth. The crossing took months. We moved through waters still haunted by the war. The crew was a mix of veterans and fresh recruits, men who'd seen too much, and boys who'd seen nothing. We didn't talk much about where we were going or why. Orders were orders. We crossed the equator before Christmas, the heat choking below decks. Then the air turned sharp, clean, and cruel. The ship pitched through gray water, and each day the temperature dropped until the sea turned to slush. When the first icebergs appeared, everyone went quiet. Even the old hands watched them like ghosts. We reached the Bay of Whales at the end of December. The ice shelf there looked endless, white, rising straight from black water. The ship's spotlights swept over ridges that glittered green like glass. We dropped anchor beside the ice barrier and set up the seaplane crane. The air bit through our parkas, the kind of cold that made metal sing when you touched it. The first night, nobody slept well. The ship creaked and groaned as the ice shifted around us, pressing against the hull. Some of the men said they heard voices in the wind, whispers in a language that sounded almost human, but not quite. The air had a smell to it, sharp and metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. It got stronger at night, mixing with diesel until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The first week was routine. We flew short recon runs, mapped in grids, and dropped supplies to the ground team building Little America 4 base. We'd lift off in half light, the sun never quite rising, never quite setting, just circling the horizon in that strange polar twilight. The plane would shudder as we gained altitude, engines roaring, frost forming on the windows in intricate patterns. We'd circle the coast, following grid lines on charts, taking photographs of ice and more ice. Radio chatter was constant during those flights, check-ins every 15 minutes, position reports, weather observations. But there were gaps in the static sometimes, moments where the frequency would go dead silent, and you could almost hear something underneath, not quite a sound, more like a feeling, a pressure in your ears. The magnetometer readings were off from the start. Small variations, the kind you'd expect near the magnetic pole, but with a pattern to them, a rhythm. 3 peaks, a valley, 3 peaks, a longer valley. I mentioned it to Hayes on the 3rd day, showed him the charts. He looked at them for a long time, then told me to keep logging, but not to discuss it with the crew. When I asked why, he said, "Because we're not the first ones to notice. That should have been my warning." But I was young and curious, and the mystery pulled at me. Nothing strange happened until the 5th flight that morning. My compass spun 4 full turns during climb-out. Sullivan thought it was just magnetic flux, but it happened again halfway across the Ross Shelf. The magnetometer needle froze against the stop, then shook like a live wire. At the same time, the receiver picked up a low rhythmic pulse. 3 beats every 9 seconds. Not interference, not any known signal. I logged it, marked bearings, and passed it to Hayes. He read the numbers twice and told me to file it for comms analysis. No one spoke of it again. That night on deck, the sky was full of ice halos, pale rings around the moon. The smell of diesel mixed with something else, like burnt sulfur. The wind carried it from the ice shelf. The crew joked about volcanoes under the snow, but I saw the lieutenant from the science team watching the horizon with field glasses long after the laughter died. A day later, a small shore survey group went missing. 4 men and their tracked sled, last seen heading toward the western ridges. The weather had turned and grounded our planes. By the 2nd night, radio contact was gone. The command ordered our crew to prepare for a search once the storm broke. When the sky finally cleared, the light was blinding. Ice shimmered in bands of blue and silver. We were told to check a new coordinate west of the known map lines. Hayes handed us a sealed metal case to take along, marked only with code numbers. He said it contained environmental sensors. It rattled when moved. We launched at dawn, engines shaking frost loose from their mounts. As the tender shrank behind us, I heard that same faint thump under the fuselage, almost like the heartbeat of the hull itself. The pilot called it ice shift. I wasn't so sure. We flew 2 hours on dead reckoning, scanning for movement or smoke when the ice opened into a stretch of dark water ahead. It didn't look right. Perfectly round, steam rising off it. The sulfur smell hit us again. Stronger this time, I marked the coordinate and set the receiver to long wave band. The pulse came alive, clean and even. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. I started counting without meaning to. Every group of 9, a cycle. The pilot circled once and said we'd try to land on the edge of the water to check the site. The water should have been frozen solid, yet it held steady waves, small but constant. The engineer said it was geothermal. Hayes only nodded. The first time our floats touched that surface, the smell filled the cabin. Something metallic underneath, like old coins soaked in brine. The needle on the magnetometer snapped hard right and stuck there. We taxied closer to the inner ring, careful not to break thin ice. Beneath it, something dark moved lines or ridges, too straight for natural rock. The pilot cut engines to idle. The water slapped once, twice. Then the hull thumped in the same pattern I had heard before. That's when I realized the pulse in my headset had synced with the sound against the hull. Same spacing, same rhythm. The hair on my neck lifted. We drifted there for a full minute before Hayes ordered cameras ready. The pilot kept the plane steady while the photographer leaned out the hatch. He took a full roll of shots, one after another, fingers stiff in his gloves. The lens fogged from the heat coming off that water. None of us spoke. The engineer watched the temperature gauge climb a few degrees, though the air outside was well below freezing. I logged everything: the time, the coordinates, the fuel left, the pulse count. My pencil tip broke halfway through. The sound in my headset shifted once, as if the signal had moved. I tried calling the tender, but got nothing except static. When I pulled the headset away, I could still hear it faintly through the hull, like it was inside the plane itself. Hayes told us to taxi closer to shore. The edge was rough ice mixed with gravel, a strip of black rock that didn't match the white world around it. We spotted 2 sleds half buried in drifted snow. No movement. The pilot killed the engines and silence pressed in. Even the wind had stopped. We climbed out, boots sinking into slush. The air carried that sharp sulfur tang, thick enough to taste. The smell clung to our scarves and gloves. We found the first man near the sleds, frozen in his parka, face turned toward the ice field. But it was his expression that haunted me wonder, like he'd seen something beautiful in his last moments. His radio pack was smashed, the antenna bent flat. The second body lay 20 yards farther, half covered by drift, same expression. No wounds, just still. The other two were gone. Their gear was scattered like they'd left in a hurry. Among it was a metal case smaller than a typewriter painted dull gray. It was warm, almost hot. Hayes told us to bring it aboard. The lid had a round mark on it, something scorched into the paint. 3 concentric rings like ripples. We loaded the case, then the bodies. The pilot wanted to leave fast. The wind was changing, and the sky was closing in again. We rolled down the length for takeoff, engines roaring. The hull thumped twice, then again in rhythm. I counted 3 sets before we lifted. During climb out, the magnetometer needle returned to normal like nothing had happened. The pulse in my headset faded until it was gone. I switched frequencies and tried the ship again. This time, the radio cleared up at once. Command told us to return and prepare a report. No questions about the men we found. No mention of the coordinates. Back aboard the Pine Island, medical took the bodies, while a team in parkas marked with no insignia carried the warm case below decks. We weren't told where. Later, when I went to file my radio log, the communications officer stopped me. He slid a new sheet across the table and told me to rewrite it. No pulse entries, no signal anomaly. The line about the open water replaced with weather-obscured surface. He said these were the Admiral's orders. The crew didn't argue, but we all felt it. Something was off. The air around the tender had the same burnt smell as the lake. Men complained about headaches. A few swore their compasses drifted, even inside the mess hall. 2 nights later, Hayes called me and Sullivan to the wardroom. The room was dim. The only light from a single lamp on the table, the gray case sat there, wiped clean. He told us the next flight would cover the same area, this time with instruments tuned to the pulse frequency I had logged. He called it a calibration check. I asked what caused the pulse. He looked at me a long time before saying, "It was probably atmospheric." His tone made clear that was the end of it. Sullivan didn't like it. He said we were being used for something that wasn't part of any survival training. Hayes told him orders came from the top and the discussion was closed. We were to launch at first light. That night, I couldn't sleep. The engines outside ticked as they cooled. Each click spaced just like the pulse. 3, pause, 3, pause, 9. I counted without meaning to. When the wind shifted, the sulfur smell drifted through the vents again. I tried the long-wave receiver one last time before turning in. The signal returned, faint but steady. Not a voice, not Morse, just that same slow beat under the hiss, like something breathing deep under ice. Morning came gray and windless. Sullivan met me on deck, eyes red from no sleep. He asked if the signal was still there. I nodded. He said, "Then it's waiting." We launched on schedule. The sea around us flat as glass. None of us spoke during climb out. I kept my eyes on the instruments, waiting for the first tremor on the needle. It came sooner than I expected. The pulse was stronger now, sharper, as if whatever sent it was closer. I logged the time, the bearing, and the distance to our previous coordinates. Sullivan gave a short nod and banked us toward that stretch of broken white where we'd found the warm water. I could smell the sulfur again before we even saw the lake. The pulse rose with it, steady as a heartbeat. Stone crossed himself quietly, his hands shaking on the throttle. We were going back into the same circle of steam and silence, only this time, the orders were not to rescue anyone. The flight to the lake took less than 2 hours. We flew low under the cloud base, engines running smooth but tense. The sky was a flat gray sheet, no horizon, only ice fading into mist. The sulfur smell drifted in early this time, faint but certain. When the lake came into view, the shape had changed. The circle was wider, darker, and the ice at its edge had peeled back in chunks. Steam lifted in ribbons. The water below had a greenish glow, faint like light from under the surface. None of us said a word. Sullivan circled twice, slower each time. The magnetometer needle swung wide again, then locked in place. I checked the frequency list Hayes had given me. The pulse was louder now, almost clean enough to count by ear. I called out each cycle so the recorder could log it. 3 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. A long set of 9. Then silence. The pattern repeated. Hayes told us to land on the northern edge. His voice stayed calm, but he kept looking out the window like he expected something to rise. Sullivan hesitated, said the ice didn't look stable. Hayes repeated the order. The plane came down, floats touching the surface with a hiss and a hollow knock that echoed inside the hull. We drifted near the spot where the sleds had been. They were gone, swallowed by new water. The air smelled heavy, mixed with diesel, and that bitter sulfur note that burned the throat. Stone ran the pumps to circulate warm oil through the engines, keeping them ready in case we had to take off fast. Hayes opened the crate we brought along. Inside were metal rods with coiled cables, a small control box, and 2 black spheres the size of helmets. He called them transmitters, said they would test radio reflection below the ice. We set them up on the floor, connected leads to the radio panel. The pulse immediately grew stronger, now clicking through the speakers even with the set switched off. Sullivan muttered that the signal wasn't reflection. It was calling us. Nobody answered him. I kept logging numbers, neat and steady, each cycle timed to the second. After a few minutes, the light outside shifted. The clouds thinned, letting through a dull red glow. The ice on the far shore shimmered like glass. Then the water surface rippled outward, not from wind, but from something beneath. Wide circles spread from the center, slow and even. The hull thumped 3 times. Deep and heavy the stone shouted that our starboard float was rising without lift. Sullivan throttled up to balance. The water itself seemed to heave under us, as if we sat on a living thing that breathed through the lake. I looked down through the side blister. Under the green water, I saw shapes. Straight lines, sharp angles, a grid like the deck of a ship, but enormous. One section glowed faintly, then dimmed. The photographer started snapping frames through the glass until the film jammed. Hayes watched, face pale, but unreadable. He told me to mark the bearing to the light. I called out the numbers. He nodded and ordered a transmission burst on that exact line. I switched the radio to the long-wave band, pressed the key. The sound that came back wasn't static. It was the same 3-beat pattern, but faster, like it was answering us. Sullivan swore, said we needed to get out. Hayes told him to hold position for 60 seconds. That was the order. We held. The pulse built until it rattled the window frames. I could feel it in my chest, a dull hammering under my ribs. The smell grew worse, like hot metal and burnt oil. The compass spun once, then froze at due south. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The sound cut. The hull went still. Only the wind moved over the wings. Hayes told us to pull the transmitters back in. One of the rods was warm to the touch. The other had burned through its cable. He said nothing, just stared at the scorched coil before closing the crate. We took off fast. Engines near redline spray hit the windows as we climbed. Sullivan said the water behind us was boiling, but I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the fuel gauge and the clock, counting gallons and minutes. The pulse didn't return, but my ears rang in the same rhythm all the way home. Back at the tender, the deck crew helped us haul the plane aboard. They noticed the scorch marks on the floats and the streaks on the hull. The maintenance officer wrote them off as exhaust deposits. Hayes said nothing. He carried the crate away alone. That night, the deck trembled underfoot like a weak earthquake. The crew in the mess thought it was ice cracking against the hull. I wasn't sure. I heard the thump again, the same slow rhythm from the lake echoing up through the metal. I counted. 3. Pause. 3. Pause. 9. Sleep didn't come easy. Every sound from the ship matched that pattern. The groan of cables, the knock of waves, even the beats of the winch motor. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of the dark shapes under the water, lined in green light, pulsing in time with my heart. At dawn, Hayes ordered a debrief. We gathered in the wardroom, still tired, eyes burning. He said the equipment test was successful, data complete, and that the area was now off limits. We were to erase all map notes from yesterday's flight. The magnetometer records were sealed in his briefcase. Sullivan protested, said we'd seen structural formations under the ice. Hayes looked at him and said, "You saw reflections, nothing more." Then he left the room without another word. Later, the photographer found his film rolls gone from the darkroom. In their place lay new ones, unexposed, labeled with the same flight number. He didn't speak about it again. By evening, the wind shifted north and the temperature rose above freezing. The smell of sulfur returned, stronger this time, sweeping across the deck. Someone joked about volcanoes again. I didn't laugh. I sat by the rail, notebook in hand, counting the pulse that no one else could hear. The next 3 days blurred together. Flights were canceled for weather, though the sky stayed clear. The sea around the tender froze, then cracked again as if stirred from below. Men grew restless. Routine drills stretched longer than needed just to keep hands busy. The sulfur smell never left. It clung to the paint, to our parkas, even to the food I spent most of that time in the radio room. The receivers still caught the same faint pulse every night. Always 3 beats. Pause. 3. Pause. Then 9. When I plotted the bearing, it pointed straight back to the lake. Each night, it grew a little stronger. I told the communications officer. He told me to mark it as atmospheric noise. Then he closed the log before I could sign. Sullivan started coughing, dry and rough. His hands shook when he poured coffee. He said he felt pressure behind his eyes, like altitude sickness even on deck. Stone claimed his wristwatch ran slow whenever the pulse came through the hull. We started checking time against the ship's chronometer every hour. It drifted by minutes now, not seconds. On the 4th day, a small supply convoy arrived from the Eastern Group. 3 ships and 2 escort destroyers. They carried extra fuel drums and replacement parts for our damaged float. They also brought new faces. A group of officers with no ranks stitched on their parkas came aboard at night. They took over one of the storage holds and locked it. The crew called them the Quiet Men. They kept to themselves and moved equipment none of us had seen before, long steel cases and heavy coils of cable. By morning, orders came down for another flight. This one would take readings farther inland. We were told to fly north from the lake, follow a fixed course, and maintain altitude over a set pattern. Hayes was gone, replaced by one of the Quiet Men who spoke little and carried a folded map with no markings. He rode in the jump seat behind Sullivan, watching every gauge we lifted off in calm air. The ice below stretched endless, blue under the sunlight. The pulse started again after 30 minutes, faint but steady. I kept the log clean, marking intervals and bearings. The man behind us noted each number without comment. At 80 miles inland, the compass failed. The needle spun half a circle, then stopped pointing east where it should have been south. The magnetometer went blank. The new man ordered us to hold position while he adjusted the black spheres from the crate. He said they would act as signal amplifiers. When he powered them, the radio burst alive with noise, not static, something like whispering underwater. Sullivan shouted that the intercom was dead, but I could hear voices through the noise, low and rhythmic, matching the same count I'd been logging for weeks. 3, 9. Only this time, between the beats, a tone rose and fell like breath drawn through metal. The new man told me to keep recording. His voice was calm, but his hands shook as he tuned the dial. The tone grew louder until the plane's frame began to hum. The windows vibrated. Sullivan yelled to cut power, but the man didn't move. Then the engine on the port wing coughed once, backfired, and steadied again. Outside, the ice below shimmered. Straight lines spread out from a single dark point beneath us, perfectly geometric, as if the ice itself was marked by some buried shape. The photographer grabbed his camera, but the film jammed again. He cursed under his breath, then dropped it. The man behind us pressed one switch. The noise stopped. Silence filled the cabin except for the engines. The hum lingered a few seconds longer, then faded. He closed his notebook, told us to return no explanation. On the way back, the pulse resumed, but now it was behind us, chasing our signal instead of leading it. I heard it faint through the hull again. Thump, thump, thump. The same pattern, slow but heavier. Stone looked at me and said, "It's following." We landed near dusk. The sea had turned dark as oil crew on deck watched the horizon, where steam cones rose like smoke. The man with the map left without a word, carrying the crate with help from two sailors who didn't wear Navy patches that night. I stayed awake in the radio room. I tuned through every band until I found the pulse again. It was louder than before, almost clear enough to pick out faint Morse dots inside it. I tried writing them down, but the pattern made no sense. Half letters, then gaps. When I played it back on the recorder, the tape warped at those points, like heat had touched it. Before dawn, an alarm sounded on deck. A signal flare had gone up from the shore base. A weather team was stranded after their tracked vehicles froze up near the ridge's command. Wanted a plane ready by sunrise. Ours was the only one fueled and intact. Sullivan looked worn, eyes hollow from no sleep. He didn't want to go, but orders were orders. We lifted off again before first light, carrying extra rations and a spare heater unit. The air was colder than any we'd flown through before, biting straight through the canopy glass. We followed the beacon signal until it vanished halfway to the site. The receiver caught the pulse again instead, stronger than ever. The magnetometer jumped off. Scale Stone tapped it twice, but it stayed pinned. Sullivan's voice came quiet over the intercom. "Same bearing as the lake." I looked out through the side blister. The horizon was gone. Only a wide plain of black ice stretched below, and at its center glowed a faint green light, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The smell reached us next, sulfur mixed with metal, sharp and hot. Sullivan said, "We're turning back." But the compass spun again, and the controls grew heavy as if the air had thickened. The engines roared, yet we barely climbed. The pulse filled every speaker. My headset hissed with it. I could feel it under my ribs, like my own heart was trying to match it. Stone shouted readings, but they came garbled through the noise. Then, just for an instant, I saw a movement below the ice. Something vast shifted under the surface, too large to understand, its edges straight and smooth as steel. It moved once, and the entire plane shook. The pulse stopped. We broke free of the draft a moment later, engines catching full air again. The compass settled north. Sullivan didn't speak for the rest of the flight. When we landed, the deck was silent except for the wind. Commanders were waiting. They led Sullivan away at once. None of us saw him again. That night, the quiet men packed their gear and left on a smaller transport. The sulfur smell lingered for days after they were gone. I kept the last tape hidden under my bunk. I still don't know why. 2 days passed. The base ran drills all day, though no new orders came. Word spread that 3 men from the shore team had been flown out to the carrier, one wrapped in blankets and silent, the others babbling nonsense about lights moving under the ice. None of them came back. I kept to the radio room. The long-wave bands were quiet now. No pulse, just the hollow hiss of wind. I should have been relieved. But the silence felt worse, like something listening, waiting for us to speak first. Hayes returned that night. He looked thinner, eyes red, uniform pressed, but wrong somehow. He said the Admiral wanted updated bearings on magnetic scatter. We were going out again at dawn. The pilot's replacement was already aboard, a calm man who asked no questions and carried his own map case. Before we launched, I saw two sailors loading the same gray crate into the mariner's hull. The paint had been stripped, no markings this time. The smell hit me as they passed. A faint mix of metal and that same burnt sulfur. We took off just after sunrise. The air was clear, visibility perfect. I noted that as unusual in my log. The compass held steady for the first hour, then drifted a few degrees east. The magnetometer came alive again, needle twitching. Then the pulse returned, soft at first, then steady, louder than ever. The new pilot didn't react. He flew straight and level as if he didn't hear it. Hayes leaned close to my station and said, "Log this as test signal 7. His voice was low, almost tired. We followed the pulse back to the lake. The open water was twice the size it had been. Steam rose higher, curling like smoke columns. The surface rippled in that slow pattern again. 3 waves, pause. 3 waves, 9. I couldn't look away. Hayes handed me a short message to send on a coded frequency. The wording was simple. Beacon confirmed depth unknown. I keyed it out, though I didn't understand. As soon as the message sent, the pulse changed. The pattern broke. The beats doubled in speed until they blurred into one long tone. The hull shook. The instruments went wild. Needles spinning, lights flickering. Stone shouted over the noise that the port engine had lost power. The pilot tried to climb, but we dropped 100 feet before it caught again. The light outside dimmed, though the sky stayed clear. I looked through the blister and saw the water below turning black, swallowing the green light. Then a glow rose from below, brighter than before, spreading in sharp lines like veins under the surface. Hayes told me to shut down transmission. I cut the switch, but the sound stayed. It wasn't radio now. It came through the hull itself, a low vibration, almost a voice buried inside it. The new pilot kept his eyes on the horizon, hands steady on the controls. I remember the way his face didn't change at all when the compass spun full circle twice and stopped dead at north again. Stone shouted that we were overheating. The smell of hot oil and sulfur filled the cabin. I saw frost melting off the window frames, though the outside temperature was far below 0. Then, as suddenly as it began, it all stopped. The hum cut out. The gauges froze mid-swing. We leveled off in dead air, engine steady. No one spoke for a long time. Hayes finally told us to return to base. His tone was flat, like a man reading from a page. I nodded, switched to the main channel, and tried to call the tender. Nothing but static answered. We flew blind for nearly an hour, following dead reckoning and the faint outline of the sun. The pulse did not return, but every now and then the hull gave one single knock, always one, never more. When we found the tender again, she was listing slightly to starboard. Ice had shifted around her hull, groaning loud enough to hear over the engines. As we landed, I saw cranes lowering something large and covered into a cargo hold. Whatever it was steamed in the cold air. Once aboard, Hayes and the new pilot left with the crate. The rest of us were told to stand down. No report, no debrief, just rest orders that felt more like isolation. That night, I found a small slip of paper wedged in my flight jacket pocket. 3 lines of numbers, a frequency, a bearing, a depth reading written in feet, not meters. No name, no signature. I checked the numbers twice. The depth was impossible for a lake on ice, too deep. It meant the water went far below the shelf, into rock or something else. When I tried to bring it to the communications officer, he took the paper, looked at it once, and told me to forget it. He said, "You don't want to keep that, son." Then he tore it in half and threw it into the trash drum. But I had already copied the numbers in my notebook. That same night, the pulse returned to my headphones. Even though the radio was off, I heard it in my own breath, slow and even. 3, pause, 3, pause, 9. By morning, the ship was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. The generator still hummed, engines still ticked, but every voice on deck had dropped to whispers. It was as if the cold had muted everything. The men avoided the port side where the new equipment had been loaded. Thick tarps covered it, but steam still escaped from underneath. Haze was gone again. No one knew where. The new pilot had moved into a separate cabin and locked it from the inside. I saw his boots outside the door, lined neatly like a man ready to leave, but waiting for the order. Around noon, the ship's bell rang twice. The call for officers to muster. None of us were invited, but word spread fast. One of the destroyers to port had picked up something on sonar. A moving contact under the ice shelf, running parallel to our position, about 100 feet below the surface. The signal came and went, never clear. The officers called it a false return, but their faces told a different story. That night, I was ordered to keep a continuous radio watch. The air was thick with static from a new storm moving in. Between bursts, I caught the pulse again, faint and distant. I timed it. The intervals were widening, as if whatever sent it was moving away, yet the sound still made the hull tremble. At 2 a.m, the intercom clicked. A voice, flat, almost mechanical, told me to report to the flight deck. No name, no rank, just the order. When I reached the deck, I found Hayes standing by the edge, coat unbuttoned despite the cold. The air smelled stronger than ever, a mix of fuel and burnt stone. The sea ice around the ship glowed faintly in the dark, lines of pale green running across it like veins. He told me quietly that we were leaving in 1 hour. Not a flight, he said. A recovery. He handed me a sealed envelope. It had my name on it, typed, not written. He said I was to open it only if the plane failed to return. Then he walked away, coat flapping in the wind. He didn't come back. We took off just before dawn. The new pilot at the controls again, the same calm face, no one else aboard except me and Stone. The sky was gray, snow swirling in small flakes that made the world look endless. Our course matched the same bearing as before. We flew in silence for nearly an hour. Then the pulse returned, steady and clear. It wasn't in the headphones this time. It came from the hull, deep and heavy, in time with the engines. Thump, thump, thump. I could feel it through the floor. Stone whispered that it sounded like depth charges, far below us. The pilot didn't answer. The sea below opened again into that wide circle of dark water. The edges steamed, glowing faintly green beneath the surface. The pilot said we'd descend for visual confirmation. We came low, barely 50 feet above the surface. The water rolled in slow waves, too even for wind. The compass turned once, then froze dead north. Something flashed below, not light reflection. Smooth curve of metal or stone, huge, moving with the water's flow. I caught only a glimpse before the pilot pulled us up. The hull groaned under the strain. We circled twice. The glow below us pulsed 3 times, then went dark. The pulse in the hull stopped with it. The pilot said quietly, "That's enough." He turned the plane home. On the way back, we passed over open cracks in the ice where steam rose like breath. The smell followed us for miles. When we landed, no one met us on deck. The ship looked different. Lights dimmer, cranes locked down. The officers were gone. Only a few deckhands moved in silence, eyes down. The pilot left without a word, walking toward the lower deck where the quiet men had worked. I went back to my station and logged the entire flight. Every minute, every pulse count. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single line typed on plain paper. "Do not listen at night." I read it twice. The words made no sense until I noticed it. The faint tapping on the bulkhead beside me. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. 9. I turned off the radio. The sound stayed. That was when I knew whatever we'd found out there hadn't stayed behind. It had followed us home. We reached South America by late March. The sea was calm. Before we docked, men in plain coats collected every log, every tape. We signed non-disclosure agreements. They separated crews, scattered us across bases. I went home, discharged with honors. But sleep never came easy. Some nights I'd wake to the faint rhythm. 3, pause, 3, pause. 9 years later, I read about Operation Argus, nuclear tests in the South Atlantic. The coordinates were too close to where we'd been. They said it was for atmosphere study. I knew better. They were burying something. I moved to Montana, as far from the ocean as I could get. I worked radio towers, married, had a son. I never told anyone the full story. But the pulse never left. Some nights it was faint. Other nights it filled my skull. In 1958, the nightmares changed, more vivid. I'd dream of standing on the ice, watching the water ripple. 3 waves, pause, 3 waves, 9. I started finding things. A compass that spun backward, frost patterns on windows that formed geometric shapes, straight lines crossing at right angles. In March 1959, I got a letter. No return address, postmarked from McMurdo Station. Inside, they're going back. Station going dark. Remember what you heard. That night, the pulse came back stronger. In the house, the walls hummed. My wife heard it too. The next morning, I found my son in the basement. He was 7, drawing with chalk. Over and over, the same pattern. Circles within circles, 3 rings. The exact mark from the gray crate. He said it came in a dream. Said he heard something humming under the ground. That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent. I started writing everything down, but the more I wrote, the stronger the connection became. The pulse grew louder. In 1961, the engineer from our crew found me. He looked like hell. He'd been having the dreams too. He said he'd tracked down a scientist who'd been part of the Quiet Men. The scientist told him things Operation Highjump wasn't just exploration. They'd known something was there. The equipment was designed to communicate, to make contact. The pulse was a beacon. When we responded, when Hayes ordered me to send that transmission, we'd completed a circuit. We'd answered a call. The scientist said the government had known for years they'd picked up signals on deep Earth sensors. After the war, they had resources to investigate. Operation Highjump was the first real attempt at contact, and it had worked. After we left, they'd sent more missions. They'd gone back, drilled down, sent equipment into the water. They'd found a structure, massive, intact, active. The scientist called it a gateway. He said they tried to stop it. In 1958, they detonated nuclear devices over the South Atlantic Operation Argus, but they weren't atmospheric tests. They were trying to disrupt the signal. It didn't work. The scientist's last words: tell everyone who heard it to stay away from the ice. When the gateway opens, it will call them home. And they'll go, whether they want to or not. The engineer said he was going south, back to the ice. He couldn't explain why, just that he had to. The pull was too strong. 3 months later, he disappeared. They found his car at a marina in San Diego Keys in the ignition. No body. After that, I stopped sleeping. The pulse was constant. My son started having nightmares, screaming about drowning under green light. In 1963, I made a decision. I gathered all my notes and put them in a sealed metal box. I buried it in the mountains. I drew a map and put it in our safety deposit box. Then I waited. The call grew stronger. I started losing time. My wife would find me in the yard at night, staring south. On October 3rd, I woke before dawn. The pulse was clear, pure, strong as a radio beacon. I got up, kissed my sleeping son, left a note on the kitchen table. I drove to the airport and bought a ticket. But at the airport, I saw the news. A research station in Antarctica had gone dark. McMurdo Station. All communication stopped. I watched the footage and knew what had happened. The gateway had opened. The ones who'd been called had gone through. I sat there with my boarding pass, and something shifted. The pull weakened. Not gone, but manageable. I could feel the ice still calling, but I could also feel my feet on solid ground. I could remember my son's hand in mine. I tore up the boarding pass. I drove home. I told my wife I was sick, that I needed help. For the first time in years, I told her part of the truth about the pulse, the nightmares, the feeling that something was calling me. Over the months, I saw doctors. They gave me medications. I learned to live with it. The pull faded. My son's nightmares stopped. In 1969, I got a package. A photograph showing the Ross ice shelf from the air. At the center was a dark circle, perfectly round, steaming. Written on the back, "Still waiting, still listening." I burned it. But I kept the words in mind. I'm 73 now. The pulse is still there, fainter but constant. My wife passed 5 years ago. My son has kids of his own. He doesn't know about any of this. This morning, I woke to silence. For the first time in 36 years, I can't hear the pulse. The call has stopped. Whatever was reaching out has gone quiet. I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe the gateway closed. Maybe it's finished. Maybe everyone it called has answered. If you're reading this, listen to me. Turn back. Don't go to the ice. Don't try to make contact. Don't answer if you hear the pulse. Once you respond, you belong to whatever waits down there. I don't know what we found. I don't know if it's been there for 100 years or 100 million. But I know it doesn't belong to us. The ice keeps its secrets for a reason. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some calls aren't meant to be answered. When I die, these pages will go to my son. I hope somewhere, in some future generation, someone remembers. The ice is waiting. It's always waiting. When the world forgets what's buried there, they'll hear it again. And some will answer. I pray they turn back, but deep down, I know they won't. And whatever sleeps beneath it will wake again. This is the testimony of Robert Mitchell, radioman, 2nd class, United States Navy, Operation Highjump, 1946 to 1947. If you found this, remember, when the ice hums, turn back. And if you can't turn back, God help you. Because once you answer the call, the ice never lets you go.